New York's Harlem neighborhood. Across America, countless citizens queue for bread handouts and take shelter in makeshift settlements. Joblessness climbs to 1/4 of the workforce. Families watch banks seize their properties. The Great Depression tears through countless American lives. Meanwhile, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson occupies a corner table at Harlem's priciest French dining establishment, effortlessly dropping $50 on one afternoon meal. He sports a diamond ring valued at $20,000. At just 27 years old, he runs the illegal numbers racket that has positioned him among America's richest colored individuals, with holdings estimated around $8 million. Photographs acquired exclusively by the New York Herald capture Johnson's meal yesterday at Chez Maurice on Lenox Avenue. This exclusive venue charges more for single dinners than working households earn across 7 days. Johnson keeps a permanently held corner seat here. Harlem's upper echelon, whether criminals or respectable citizens, congregate at this establishment to observe and participate in a separate universe of remarkable prosperity. This world remains concealed from white New York's awareness, yet the true significance lies not in these images alone. Rather, it's the breathtaking wealth concentration these pictures document, plus the extraordinary 7-year trajectory that elevated Johnson from obscure numbers, courier making $15 weekly in 1925, to Harlem's uncontested ruler by 1932. He now commands a criminal operation yielding $5 million in yearly personal earnings. This success has enabled him to amass possessions rivaling America's legitimate industrial magnates. The Herald's 21-day financial investigation into Johnson's holdings unveils a fortune constructed through merciless commercial instinct, calculated brutality, and exceptional talent for spotting chances others overlooked. This represents a poverty-to-prosperity narrative that would earn celebration as fundamentally American, except every cent derived from unlawful ventures, and each upward step rested upon the bodies of rivals. Johnson eliminated climbing toward dominance. Federal Treasury agents monitoring Johnson's assets place his present net worth around $8 million. In 1932, this fortune equals roughly $150 to $160 million in contemporary buying capacity. Beyond mere figures, what startles investigators is how rapidly this accumulation occurred. Johnson constructed this empire across approximately 7 years, averaging beyond $1 million in annual wealth generation throughout an era when typical American laborers earn under $1,000 yearly, and when most commercial enterprises collapse rather than expand. The physical expressions of this prosperity prove astounding. Johnson's main transportation is a 1931 Duesenberg Model J, America's costliest and most luxurious manufactured automobile. This Duesenberg, custom ordered directly from the Indianapolis factory, cost Johnson $25,000. This exceeds what most Americans will make across 20 years of employment. It surpasses the price of a sizable house. It represents such extreme affluence that even most millionaires cannot purchase such machines. Johnson's Duesenberg displays custom burgundy coating, hand-stitched leather appointments, bulletproof glass windows added at extra expense, and chrome details that shine even under Harlem's dim street illumination. This vehicle is so recognizable that Johnson's appearance anywhere throughout Harlem gets instantly noticed, the Duesenberg functioning as mobile billboard of his prosperity and influence. However, the Duesenberg represents just one among 5 vehicles Johnson possesses. His collection additionally includes a 1932 Cadillac V16 costing $8,000, armored with reinforced steel body construction and bulletproof glazing, deployed when protection rather than appearance takes priority. A 1931 Packard 12 costing $5,000 gets used by his chauffeur for everyday tasks. 2 additional automobiles with combined cost of $5,000 serve his security personnel. Complete automotive investment totals $43,000, sufficient funds to buy 40 typical homes in 1932, enough to sustain a working-class household across 30 years, allocated to transportation serving no function except wealth exhibition and providing luxury that 99.9% of Americans cannot conceive. The jewelry collection totals $75,000 in diamonds and platinum. The diamond ring appearing in yesterday's images, a 3½ carat diamond mounted in platinum, cost Johnson $20,000 upon purchasing it from a Fifth Avenue jeweler during 1931. This ring alone embodies greater wealth than most Americans will gather throughout complete lifetimes. Yet investigators have verified Johnson possesses at minimum 8 additional diamond rings ranging between $5,000 to $15,000 apiece, creating a combined ring portfolio exceeding $100,000. Past rings, Johnson's jewelry accumulation encompasses 4 platinum pocket timepieces, averaging $2,500 each, totaling $10,000 in value. A diamond-studded wristwatch acquired from Cartier in 1932 cost $8,000. Multiple diamond cufflink sets, 12 documented pairs, averaging $1,500 per set, totaling $18,000. Platinum money clips, tie fasteners, and additional accessories carry estimated value of $10,000. Gold chains, rings for female associates, and assorted items hold estimated worth of $7,000. Complete jewelry portfolio value reaches approximately $75,000 to $80,000. Riches Johnson literally carries on his person, serving zero practical function, existing purely to prove he commands resources so immense that allocating $20,000 toward one ring means nothing. Johnson retains Henry Hank Thomas, Harlem's foremost custom clothier, who fabricates suits exclusively for Johnson at $400 to $500 each. Observers report Johnson possesses over 100 custom suits, never donning identical suits twice within any month, treating $400 suits as throwaway fashion instead of investments requiring careful preservation. At typical cost of $450 each, Johnson's suit collection alone holds value of $45,000. His footwear collection surpasses 50 pairs of custom-crafted shoes made by a Harlem shoemaker, charging $25 per pair, totaling $6,250. His shirt inventory includes over 200 silk shirts at $30 apiece, when regular shirts cost $2, totaling $6,000 worth. His accessories include custom headwear costing $50 to $100 each, with over 30 owned, leather hand coverings at $25 per pair, with dozens possessed, and silk neckties numbering over 100 at $15 to $25 each. Johnson employs a personal attendant maintaining this clothing collection, ensuring footwear receives daily polishing, rotating suits to minimize deterioration, treating Johnson's garments with attention museums dedicate to invaluable relics. He retains a personal grooming specialist, visiting his residence thrice weekly at $25 per appointment, expending over $3,600 yearly solely on haircuts and grooming, exceeding what most households earn across 3 years. Johnson's 4-level brownstone at 409 Edgecombe Avenue on Sugar Hill, Harlem's most distinguished address, was acquired in 1931 for $85,000. This price shocked real estate markets when comparable properties sold between $30,000 to $40,000. The premium reflected both Johnson's determination to establish presence in Harlem's most prestigious district and the property's characteristics, including reinforced construction suitable for fortress modification, private garage space, and positioning offering clear observation lines for protection purposes. Johnson immediately allocated an additional $75,000 toward renovations and appointments. Steel reinforced doors and bulletproof windows cost $15,000. Concealed safe chamber, accessible through movable bookshelf, cost $8,000. Custom furnishings imported from Europe cost $20,000. Persian floor coverings, artistic pieces, and decorative elements cost $18,000. Protection systems, illumination, and alterations cost $14,000. The residence operates with permanent staff of 5 individuals. Cook earns $40 weekly. Housekeeper earns $35 weekly. Chauffeur earns $50 weekly. Personal attendant earns $45 weekly. Round-the-clock security guard earns $60 weekly, creating total yearly payroll of $11,960, just maintaining a private dwelling, exceeding 10 working-class families' combined yearly earnings. Monthly operational costs, including utilities and food, Johnson demands finest ingredients available, wine cellar upkeep, his collection of prohibited French wines valued at $15,000, and miscellaneous expenditures surpass $2,000 monthly, or $24,000 yearly allocated merely sustaining a lifestyle. While millions of Americans want basic housing, Johnson dines at Chez Maurice 5 to 6 times each week, averaging $45 to $50 per meal, including wine, food for guests he hosts, and his trademark generous gratuities. He routinely tips 100 to 150% of bills, leaving $60 to $70 gratuities on $40 meals. Yearly dining expenditures at Chez Maurice alone approximate $12,000 to $14,000. He patronizes additional expensive venues throughout Harlem and downtown Manhattan, adding another $6,000 to $8,000 in yearly dining costs. Complete annual allocation on restaurant dining totals $18,000 to $22,000. Sufficient funds to nourish 100 families across 1 year, allocated by one individual on meals consumed and forgotten within hours. Entertainment expenditures prove equally staggering. Johnson maintains permanently held tables at the Cotton Club, with annual reservation fee of $2,000, at the Savoy Ballroom, with yearly fee of $1,500, and at additional nightclubs. On characteristic evenings out, he allocates $500 to $1,000 on champagne, amusement, and gratuities, generating spectacles where he purchases bottles of $100 champagne for numerous tables, tips performers $50 to $100 following performances, and allocates money so visibly that his evenings out become discussed occasions, reinforcing his standing for boundless wealth. Estimated yearly entertainment expenditures reach $15,000 to $18,000, bringing complete annual consumption on dining and amusement to roughly $33,000 to $40,000, surpassing what most legitimate commercial operations yield in yearly profit allocated to fleeting pleasures. How did Bumpy Johnson accomplish this remarkable wealth generation? The Herald's investigation exposes a narrative combining intelligence, ruthlessness, strategic thinking, and readiness to employ extreme brutality, characteristics that in legitimate commerce might yield success, but that within Harlem's criminal landscape produced a fortune surpassing what most legitimate businessmen attain. Bumpy Johnson entered the world in desperate poverty in Charleston, South Carolina during 1905. His father made perhaps $8 to $10 weekly as a dock laborer. His mother earned $5 to $6 weekly as a domestic worker. The family existed in conditions approaching complete destitution, including inadequate nutrition, no interior plumbing, wearing garments until they literally disintegrated, experiencing the relentless, soul-crushing poverty characterizing most colored households in Jim Crow South. When the family relocated to Harlem in 1919, seeking improved circumstances, they discovered the North offered different deprivation forms rather than authentic opportunity. William Johnson secured porter work earning $12 weekly. Margaret found cleaning work earning $8 weekly. Even with both parents employed, the family struggled affording rent, food, and fundamental necessities in a city where everything cost more than the South they'd abandoned. Young Bumpy attended school sporadically, performed odd jobs, and by age 15, grasped a fundamental reality that would direct his existence. Legitimate employment available to colored men in 1920 would never deliver more than bare survival, would never present chances for genuine prosperity, would sentence him to lifetime poverty interrupted by occasional years of slightly reduced severe poverty. Johnson's transformation commenced in 1925, when at age 20 he started working for Stephanie Street. Claire, the legendary Madam Queen of Policy, who had constructed Harlem's most sophisticated gambling network, How Johnson captured Street Claire's attention remains debated. Some accounts claim he rescued her from a robbery, demonstrating both bravery and capability. By 1926, Johnson was making $200 weekly as Street Claire's principal enforcer and guardian, more money than his father had earned monthly, prosperity seeming remarkable for a 21-year-old. However, the money itself mattered less than knowledge Johnson acquired throughout this period. Street Claire instructed him in policy gambling mathematics, how odds were arranged, guaranteeing operator earnings, how to determine payouts, how to control cash movements, generating massive profits from millions of tiny wagers, the significance of political relationships. Street Claire maintained connections with police captains, paying $500 to $1,000 monthly to precinct commanders, ensuring minimal raids, with Tammany Hall district leaders receiving campaign contributions exchanged for protection, with judges dismissing charges when Street Claire's workers faced arrest. The calculated application of brutality. Johnson learned that effective violence was measured and intentional rather than random and passionate. Eliminating competitors served commercial objectives, including removing threats and discouraging others from challenging operations, but required calculation, avoiding federal scrutiny that local political relationships couldn't deflect. The strength of community backing. Street Claire employed hundreds of Harlem residents, donated to churches and charitable organizations, positioned herself not as exploiter but as accomplished businesswoman, providing chances unavailable in legitimate economy. This generated protective devotion more valuable than any violence amount could create. By 1928, Johnson was earning roughly $15,000 yearly, approximately $200,000 in contemporary buying capacity, remarkable income but nowhere approaching wealth he would subsequently gather. More significantly, he had accumulated understanding about operating criminal ventures on scales permitting wealth generation that mere employment, even highly compensated employment, could never yield. During late 1928, Johnson vanished from Harlem, not returning until early 1930, an absence of roughly 16 months that remains among the most puzzling intervals in his life story. Where he traveled and what he accomplished has never been conclusively determined, but upon returning, several elements had transformed. He possessed money. Sources estimate Johnson returned carrying $75,000 to $100,000 in currency, an enormous sum he had not controlled when departing, suggesting either involvement in highly lucrative criminal activities elsewhere or receiving this money from sources having reasons to invest in his future operations. He possessed relationships. Johnson returned with connections to criminals beyond Harlem, to figures in Chicago, in Detroit, in additional cities, permitting him to function on larger scales than had been achievable when he was merely Street Claire's worker operating within Harlem's boundaries. He possessed understanding. Johnson returned, comprehending things about criminal organization, about relationships between white and colored gangsters, about structural arrangements governing American organized crime that he had not grasped before leaving, knowledge proving crucial to his capacity, resisting Dutch Schultz's takeover attempt in 1932. The Chicago interval transformed Johnson from skilled worker into potential empire constructor, supplying both the resources and understanding necessary, constructing what would become an $8 million fortune. Upon returning to Harlem in early 1930, Johnson immediately began investing his mysterious cash holdings in constructing his own operation independent from Street Claire. Between January and December 1930, Johnson acquired 6 policy banks from smaller operators struggling during the early Depression. Total investment roughly $40,000, providing Johnson operations, yielding estimated $200,000 yearly in gross earnings. He hired enforcers and collectors away from competitors by offering superior compensation, constructing an organization of roughly 30 workers loyal to him rather than to Street Claire or additional operators. He acquired his initial real estate, including 3 apartment structures purchased for combined $60,000. delivering both rental revenue and locations for conducting policy operations without landlord interference. He established political relationships independent from Street Clair's network, making initial payments to police and politicians, constructing connections that would deliver protection for his expanding operations. By year's conclusion, Johnson commanded roughly 15% of Harlem's policy commerce, was yielding yearly earnings of approximately $150,000 to $200,000, and was positioned for the explosive expansion that would transpire across the subsequent 2 years. 1931 was the year Johnson transformed from successful operator into Harlem's controlling power. Through combination of calculated acquisitions and merciless competitor elimination, Johnson expanded his market portion from 15% to roughly 35% of Harlem's policy commerce. The expansion was accomplished through multiple approaches: buyouts of struggling operators. The Depression was destroying many smaller policy banks whose operators couldn't sustain cash reserves necessary paying winners during periods when unusual numbers appeared. Johnson, with substantial cash holdings, purchased desperate operators at prices below genuine worth, acquiring operations valued $50,000 to $75,000 for $20,000 to $30,000 from owners needing immediate currency to survive. Compelled consolidations. Operators who wouldn't sell willingly faced brutality. Their banks were robbed. Their collectors were assaulted. Their families were threatened until they determined that selling to Johnson at his presented price was preferable to being eliminated from commerce entirely. Johnson's standing for measured, intentional violence made these warnings credible, and most operators chose selling rather than fighting. Calculated killings. At minimum, 8 policy operators who rejected Johnson's buyout proposals and who continued resisting his expansion were killed between January and September 1931, shot on streets, killed in their dwellings, murdered in ways transmitting clear messages to additional operators that resistance would prove fatal. None of these murders were prosecuted. Observers refused testifying. Police investigations were perfunctory, and Johnson's political relationships ensured that even when evidence indicated his participation, charges were never pursued. Protection systems. Johnson established systematic protection payments from commercial establishments throughout his territories. Grocery stores, barber establishments, restaurants, all paid $10 to $25 weekly, ensuring they wouldn't be robbed or damaged. This yielded additional $75,000 to $100,000 yearly, while also generating network of commercial establishments that functioned as collection locations for policy wagers and that had financial motivations to back Johnson's operations. Real estate purchases. Johnson acquired 15 additional properties in 1931, including apartment structures, commercial structures, vacant parcels, investing roughly $500,000 in Harlem real estate, both yielding rental revenue and delivering long-term asset appreciation that would maintain wealth even if policy operations were interrupted. By December 1931, Johnson's yearly earnings had exploded to roughly $1.5 to $2 million. His net worth had reached roughly $3 to $4 million, and he was living a lifestyle unrecognizable from the poverty he'd experienced just 6 years earlier. This was the year Johnson purchased the Strivers Row brownstone for $85,000. This was the year he bought the Duesenberg for $25,000. This was the year he began dining consistently at Chez Maurice, allocating $50 per meal without worry. This was the year he acquired the $20,000 diamond ring that would become his signature jewelry piece, custom designed by a Fifth Avenue jeweler who characteristically served only white millionaires, featuring a 3½ carat diamond of exceptional clarity mounted in platinum setting with smaller diamonds surrounding the central stone. The ring's acquisition revealed Johnson's psychology. The jeweler initially quoted $18,000, but Johnson demanded modifications including larger side diamonds, more elaborate platinum craftsmanship, custom engraving, that elevated the cost to $20,000 specifically so that he could inform people He possessed a $20,000 ring rather than an $18,000 ring. The additional $2,000 purchased nothing of practical worth, purchased only the capacity to claim ownership of an even costlier jewelry piece, exposing the degree to which Johnson's identity had become connected to material wealth displays, demonstrating how far he'd climbed from the poverty of his youth. The conflict with Dutch Schultz that emerged in 1932 was existential danger to Johnson's empire. Schultz, with resources surpassing Johnson's by a factor of 10, was methodically seizing Harlem's policy operations through economic warfare and brutality that was killing Johnson's workers and destroying his commercial ventures. However, Johnson's successful resistance, his capacity to eliminate Schultz's enforcers faster than Schultz could replace them, his capacity to sustain community backing while Schultz was perceived as outside exploiter, his mysterious relationships that apparently delivered resources and intelligence permitting him to compete with Schultz despite vast resource disadvantage, resulted in Schultz's withdrawal from Harlem in late September 1930. 2. The victory gave Johnson command of roughly 60% of Harlem's policy commerce, eliminated his most dangerous rival, and established his standing throughout New York's criminal underworld as someone who could not be intimidated or destroyed despite his relative youth and despite his race in criminal world controlled by white gangsters. By October 1932, as yesterday's photographs verify, Johnson's yearly earnings had reached roughly $4 to $5 million. His net worth had reached $8 million, and he was living with level of luxury and exhibiting level of prosperity, rivaling America's most successful legitimate businessman. Bumpy Johnson's $8 million fortune and the material excess it permits reveal uncomfortable realities about American society in 1932. The failure of legitimate chance. Johnson turned to crime not from moral inadequacy but from rational assessment that legitimate employment would never deliver escape from poverty characterizing colored existence in segregated America. His success in criminal enterprise, his capacity to gather $8 million in 7 years, proves both his considerable abilities and the reality that those abilities could never have yielded comparable prosperity in legitimate economy that systematically barred colored Americans from advancement chances. The profitability of vice during Prohibition. Johnson's prosperity was constructed entirely on activities millions of Americans participate in, including gambling and drinking alcohol, but that prohibition and anti-gambling legislation made unlawful. The criminalization of these activities generated enormous earnings for those willing to function illegally, earnings surpassing anything legitimate commercial ventures could yield, proving that prohibition has generated perverse motivations where criminality is more profitable than lawful conduct. The normalization of corruption. Johnson's capacity to function openly, dining at expensive venues, operating $25,000 automobiles, residing in $85,000 brownstone proves that Harlem's political and law enforcement institutions have been so completely corrupted that criminals can display their prosperity without fearing prosecution. The photographs capturing Johnson conducting commerce, while legitimate elites dine nearby, expose that crime has become so integrated into Harlem society that it's no longer perceived as abnormal, but rather as normal aspect of economic existence. The material hollowness. Johnson's $20,000 ring, his $25,000 automobile, his $50 meals serve zero practical function beyond wealth exhibition in era when millions starve, when families lose dwellings, when children go without sufficient food or clothing. Johnson's conspicuous consumption embodies obscene allocation of resources to purely symbolic objectives, jewelry serving no function, vehicles delivering transportation no superior than cars costing 1/10 as much, meals delivering nutrition no better than food costing 1/100th as much. His wealth generation proves that even extraordinary success in constructing fortune delivers no authentic fulfillment, only produces appetite for ever costlier displays that can never satisfy the psychological requirements that drive the accumulation.